So I'm Cynthia Lofaso. I'm a psychology professor here on campus, and I teach principles of psychology and human development and a few other odds and ends here and there. Kimberly French was asking for some topics, some ideas that students might be interested in, and so I put this one forward, maybe having a discussion about test anxiety and some strategies that students can use to try to reduce that, because this is certainly something that I observed in students, throughout the semesters, and sometimes students will come and talk to me about it, and I can try to make some accommodations to help them reduce that. But just some general strategies to take away, and then maybe the psychology club can help disperse this information as well, because I know there are a lot of students that really struggle with this, and interferes with your ability to do as well as you could do. So that's what we're talking about today, test anxiety. All right, so what we'll talk about today, and please, if you have any questions or want to kind of veer this off into a discussion, this is very flexible, very open. I am not the presenter or the expert up here. I'd like to cover a little bit about what is test anxiety, specifically what are some of the causes of test anxiety, what are some of the symptoms, and then specifically what can you do to reduce test anxiety. One of the things that I have for you is a resource page. These are some different links that were put together. There are numerous resources out there, but this is just a quick summary. And then I have also an article from the ETS group, if you're interested, that's called Reducing Test Anxiety, a guide for test takers. If anybody really wants to read something in depth on the topic, I have that. So what is test anxiety? It's something that would fall under more of a generalized anxiety disorder. Where you have a specific situation, though, that's creating high stress and is interfering with your ability to think clearly and ability to really show what you know on exams or on papers or whatever assignments that you're working on. So it's too much stress in a test-taking situation, and that stress interferes. It gets in the way with your ability to study properly and to actually sit down and take the exam, because you start to get overwhelmed with a lot of negative thoughts, or even just the anxiety itself can really interfere with that thinking process. The interesting thing about test anxiety, just like so many other anxieties that we learn about in principles of psychology, you're not born with test anxiety. Now, you might be born with a predisposition, or you might be born where you're more prone towards anxiety or a generalized anxiety problem in your life, but test anxiety is something very specific that's learned. And so if you can learn it, and you're not even aware that you're learning it, but if you can learn it, then what does that mean? You can unlearn it, right? You can. There are strategies that you can engage in. Isn't that good when I give you the answers up there? If all your tests were like that, then it'd be a piece of cake. That's right. All right, so what causes test anxiety? It's learned over a period of time, and it's often caused by the sum of the following: pressure from others to perform well, pressure on yourself to perform well as well, just that feeling of pressure on yourself to do very well. Negative test experiences from the past, and that's a really big one. If you've had some negative experiences from the past, then that might start to get into your thinking process that you're not a good test taker. And how many times have I heard that from students? I'm not a good test taker. And the reality is that you may be a very good test taker, but you've kind of, for lack of a more technical term, psyched yourself out, to convincing yourself that you're not a good test taker, and then you start to feel the stress and the anxiety when you're in that test situation, and then that reinforces, right, I'm not a good test taker, And you get into this really kind of very difficult cycle that's to break, this very bad cycle is difficult to break. Fear of failure is a big one. And we have students that are in so many different situations here. Some are traditional students that are coming straight from high school. Some are returning students. Some of you are students that have not looked at a textbook or anything academic in 10 years or 15 years, and you're coming back to school, and that can be very intimidating as well. So there, lots of very high pressure situations, and then the balance of work, and school, and all the time management issues that are there can make it really difficult. Believing that your test performance determines your self-worth. And this is something that I really stress in my classes, particularly with the first exam, because I know, the first exam students are like, oh my gosh, what's this, what's going to be on this test? And they're very nervous about it. And I say over and over again, it's just a test. That's all it is it's just one little teeny tiny test out of your entire life. How much consequence is that going to have? Trying to minimize the impact of that and put it into more of a realistic perspective, that it's just an assessment of your knowledge, it's nothing more than that. And even if you fail, you can do better on another test. You can look at where the mistakes were and figure out how to improve for the next one. So again, sound effects, awesome. Again, like trying very hard not to psych yourself out, not to make it such a big thing in your mind, the test, the exam, and that if you do poorly, that somehow you're a terrible student, or you're stupid, or you can't succeed, or some really large label that has nothing to do with your performance on that particular exam on that day. Putting things in perspective. All right, so test anxiety is caused by feeling pressure to perform well. I know my parents are going to be disappointed if I don't do well on this test. So if you're in a situation where your parents are financially supporting you and they're kind of looking over your shoulder, how you doing in school, what's going on, right? I'm seeing some eyes that are recognizing that this is a situation. That's a lot of pressure. And that pressure, that stress, can start to interfere with your ability to just think clearly and do as well as if you didn't have that pressure on yourself. I'll never get into these self-defeating thoughts, basically. I'll never get into the nursing program. It's so competitive. I'll never get it. I'm not good enough. You're just really setting yourself up for failure with this way of thinking. And why did I ever think I could do this? Maybe I'm just not smart enough. What is it that really leads to success on an exam?
Preparation.
Yeah. And it's preparation when? Before the test. Yes, absolutely. But is it right before the test?
No.
Yeah, it's like a couple of days.
At very minimum, and that's a big misconception as well in trying to instill good study habits and understand how the brain works and how we can learn most effectively. And that is incrementally. Little chunks of information over a long period of time. Right? So if you have an exam that's coming up in, say, 2 weeks, you should be preparing for that exam now, from the right this very moment, with little bits though. And I will get students that will say, I made up all these flashcards and I studied and I did all this, and I didn't do well on this test and I don't understand why. Well, when did you make up all the flashcards? Yesterday. Okay, and how long did you study? Well, 8 hours. Yesterday. And I don't know about all of you, but I know my brain doesn't work that way. Right? You get maybe 30 minutes into it, and what starts to happen? You get bored. You fall asleep. You shut down. You just shut down. I mean, you just can't take in that much information. But if you did 15 or 20 minutes a day each day, you'd have beyond 8 hours of studying, and you will have learned so much more. So a lot of it is time management as well, to prevent yourself from getting into that anxiety-provoking situation where you enter the exam room or the classroom with a feeling of confidence and mastery of the material. So there's a cycle where you have this negative thinking. You may have this negative thinking, which is going to increase your anxiety. And believe me, I was an undergraduate, and I did it too. I crammed and stayed up all night and engaged in all of these really ineffective strategies, and didn't do so well. When it took me a while to figure it out that doesn't work. What works is setting myself up for success. And taking the time and planning it out and having some time management strategies that are more effective. These negative thought patterns that I've been referring to is going to increase your anxiety, which can then directly lead to an inability to think clearly, an inability to focus on the question. When you are experiencing anxiety, nervousness, tension like that, it actually interferes with the thought process, which then makes you feel, how do you feel when you can't even really focus on the question? Stupid. And how does it make you feel? Do you feel calm?
Stressed out.
You feel stressed out, right? And so you get yourself into this cycle of stress and not knowing the answer, which makes you feel more stressed and this and that, and it's really hard to break out of. And very frustrating, especially in the exam situation to do that. So what can we do to stop it? Start to recognize the symptoms of test anxiety. For some people, it's really palpable, like pounding head, the classic symptoms of anxiety. Your head hurts, your heart is pounding, you've got sweaty palms. I know that this happens with some of my students as I'm handing out the exam. That not people are going to tell me they're not going to do it, but some people are going to be having that, and already they're kind of set up for really having some difficult times being able to perform to their potential. Thank you. I'm losing words here. And feeling then out of control. When you have these very high feelings of stress, and then feeling like you're unable to answer, unable to do well, unable to perform well, and it's out of your control. And that's a really scary feeling in general for just about any task, including tests and academic schoolwork. My thinking shuts down. I get very confused. I get exhausted from it. It's just like I can still remember this palpable feeling after an exam. You walk out the door of the classroom, and how do you feel?
Depends on the class. Because I know I was in math class, and I'm like, oh, I failed that. I was like looking at it, like, how to fail this.
Yeah.
I failed it.
And you failed it.
Yeah. I don't do that anymore. So, yeah.
Okay. So I hear a couple of things going on in there. Like I don't do
Math and
you and math don't get along.
Right.
So there's well, let's just hang on to that for a second. I'm thinking about after final exams, especially, you've got just exam, right? And the tension is just so high. And you walk out of that last one, and yeah, it's like a, that physical release of it's done. And there's nothing I can do now to change it. So the tension for that moment goes away. And sometimes even I remember suddenly remembering the answers. Oh. Now that I don't have all this anxiety in my way, I completely understand that. So the anxiety just really getting in the way with your ability to think clearly. Closed, shut down, shuts you down, the thinking process. I keep looking at the clock and thinking about how much there is to do. This is a really big problem. I mean, clocks should just go away. I find this with my online students even, who have lots of time. They don't realize they have lots of time. I try to explain to them they have lots of time to take quizzes. But they look at the clock, or there's a little timer that's up there on the computer screen. And just that, right there, it just freaks them out. And they're so worried about finishing on time that they end up not doing well, or actually not finishing on time, and rushing through at the very end. Forget about the clock. Ideally, exams are created. They should be created. Mine are certainly created. Hello, come on in. With the recognition of how much can be completed in a 50-minute session or a 75-minute session, or however long you have to take the exam. So, try to stop watching the clock and just focus on the material and not worry about the time. All right, so symptoms again: headaches, tension in the neck and shoulders, stomach aches. This is very common as well. Rapid heartbeat, shallow breathing, sweaty palms. Anything else? Anything else that I'm missing here? Shaking. Physical shaking, yeah.
Tiredness, like instant tiredness at the bottom.
Yeah. And all of these make it pretty uncomfortable to sit and perform well academically, to have all of these physiological symptoms. So these could be accompanied by some thought disruptions, inability to think through on the problem, confusion, loss of concentration, a lot of negative self-talk, really self-defeating thoughts, feeling out of control. What else? What am I missing here? Is that pretty much?
Pretty comprehensive.
Pretty comprehensive. It's all right there. Okay, so what can you do? That's really the crux of this. What can we do to make this stuff go away? There's a 3-step approach that I'm proposing here. First of all, working on those self-defeating thoughts. And maybe even just bringing them down. And I want to come back to the I don't do math. Because that's a really...
When I was 6 years old, my teacher took our math test scores and posted them outside the door, outside the classroom, and I was always like, so I created like a little stick.
Nice, yeah, wonderful. What a great teacher.
Oh, yeah, wasn't she fantastic?
That's
anyway, so I created like a stick because I was always at the bottom,
right.
Like everything.
Right.
So it wasn't just math, it was other subjects of math. I was like the last or next to last student.
right, right,
My self-esteem was destroyed at the age of 6.
right. And so you get into, I mean, that is a horrible strategy for...
Doesn't do it now because so many teachers complain. It wasn't just my teacher. I think it was like the teachers upstairs and like upper grades did it too.
Yeah.
TC no doesn't do it anymore because it
Yeah.
was killing everyone's self-esteem.
Of course.
And parents were like, well, my child's not at the top, but still,
Right,
it's horrible.
right.
So,
I mean, teachers certainly want to give realistic feedback. We can't all get A's on everything.
grades outside the classroom though. I mean, like,
No, absolutely
most
not.
of the inside at least. Like if you want to like have one-on-one time, I guess, I don't know.
Absolutely.
6, so.
No, absolutely. And so what you're describing to me is a very early setup there, for self-defeating thoughts there. Like, I'm being told right here at the age of 6, I can't do math. So I believe I can't do math. And you're pretty convinced.
It's why I hate math so
Yeah.
much.
Right. Yeah.
I hate math.
Yeah. And math, and you're not alone. I mean, math is I think a lot of people have similar experiences with that, like that with math, and have very negative attitudes towards math. based on similar types of experiences or a lot of lack of success in the early years and just feeling like I don't do math, I can't do math. And you incorporate that into your belief system. I can't do math. Well, that's not true. You all can do math.
I can do it with a calculator, but
You can do math without a calculator. You can. I'm telling you, you can. With the right setup and with the right setup to help you understand the concepts. You can. You're just not there yet, but you can. And you know, it's trying to change that thought process in ourselves. That not that I can't do this, but that I'm not doing it yet. I can do it if I, have the right class and I get the right skills and I get the right support and I get tutoring or whatever the things are, the resources are that you're going to need to help you turn this around for yourself. And it may be more than incremental studying. I mean, it may be something that's much bigger, where it's on the topic. But this is something in psychology that we talk about beyond test anxiety. Self-defeating thoughts are very powerful. And if you have that mindset about yourself, that I'm a failure, I can't succeed, well, guess what's going to happen? You go right in that direction. So, one of the strategies is trying to recognize self-defeating thoughts in yourself and turn them around into something positive that's tangible. It may not be like, I'm a math genius, because that's too big, and that's probably you're not a math genius, and so you're setting yourself up, in kind of in a wrong way there too. But something that's more realistic. I can do this. I just need to figure out how. I do have the ability to do it. It's within me. Incorporating relaxation techniques. And we'll talk about, I'll give you an example. There are lots of different ways that you can do this. One very simple one is just breathing. And probably one of the most effective ones too is just breathing. You probably can't listen to some relaxation CD while you're in your exam. I need my mindfulness meditation in order to take my math test. That's not going to happen. But you can practice some things outside of the classroom situation, classroom environment, and then maybe try to bring those into the test-taking environment, and also learning how to breathe, and just to maybe take a breath before you even look at the exam to help calm your autonomic nervous system down. Because that's what's happening, is basically your autonomic nervous system is just activated, right? It's like you're running a marathon almost, and that's why you have the physiological symptoms. And if you're running a marathon, it's really hard to concentrate and read a passage of Thoreau or whatever you're supposed to be doing. And then finding opportunities to practice taking tests. Practice makes perfect, right? The way my classes are set up is that my students they just take test after test after test online, but the idea is that they're getting quizzed regularly and getting feedback regularly and getting comfortable with it regularly, so that when they come into the classroom for one particular exam, it's no big deal. It's just another, we're going to go through these questions and I'm going to do it again. And I have found that is very effective. It's very helpful for a lot of students. All right, so it's learned, so it can be unlearned. Replace anxiety with relaxation and concentration to show what you do know, what you have learned, what you've been able to master over your course of studying. Right, so changing thinking to focus on what you will do, practice positive thinking. What are some ways that we can practice positive thinking? What are some things we can say to ourselves?
I can do this.
Yeah, I mean, it's as simple as that. I can do this. Not I can't do this. But how many times do we say to ourselves, I can't? I just can't do this, it's too much. There's too much material to cover. I really don't understand this. There are 100 terms. How am I ever going to remember all of this? You know, it's just like, oh, you're just setting yourself up there for just being overwhelmed, basically. 2, maybe, I have 2 weeks. I'm going to make a plan. What do I need to accomplish between now and 2 weeks from now? All of your professors give you a syllabus at the beginning of the semester. That's that contract that you have. They're supposed to stick to it. I stick to mine. So you should know when your exams are coming up, you know, when things are supposed to be turned in. Some of this turns into a time management problem as well. You know, making that plan to study. How many of you are working in addition to going to school? So that's tough, right? It takes a few hours out of the day. You know, what can we do for time management?
Make a schedule.
Make a schedule is really helpful. And every semester, this is something I try to get my students to do. Some of them do, some of them don't. Get a planner, you know, or how many of us have smartphones now with calendars? The way that I function, and I'm talking about a lot of this from personal experience because I completed a PhD while working full time. Just completed it 2 years ago. I spent 4.5 years working at this every single day. And I have a family and I have full-time teaching responsibilities. And there were some days when I thought, I can't do this. This is too much. I'm not capable of completing this level of work. And I had to take a step back and reverse it in my own mind. I can do this, I just need to plan it out. I just need to figure it out. Right. We have 24 hours in a day. How many hours of that do we sleep? Should we sleep? 8 hours? Okay. So that puts us at, how many hours are left now? 16. How many hours in a day, if you're working, do you work?
12.
12 hours you're working?
I work 2 12-hour shifts, Saturday and Sunday.
Okay, but then you have 5 days where you don't.
For a year.
Okay. You can't work 12 hours every day.
My dad does, but
Okay. Other work schedules?
About 5 hours a day.
5 hours? So that's 13 hours?
Well, yeah.
8, 5 approximately. Alright, so we've got 11 hours left. Well,
About that.
what else do we need to do? Maybe eat? Take a shower. You're in school. How many hours a day are you in school?
it depends on the day. Not every day except for Friday.
But how many hours?
It depends on the day.
3 hours?
Sometimes it's less than that.
When we start to look at the 24-hour schedule, you know, like really look at the hours of the day and have a planner. I mean, it may, if you're very busy with, you know, children and taking children here and there and managing their homework and whatever else is going on, having that plan, having that set time written down, this is my work time. That's what I did. This was my work time from 3 to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. That's PhD time. Nobody interfered with me during that time. You know, or maybe it was only from 3 to 4, whatever it was. Little bit every day, piece by piece by piece by piece, and eventually you get to the conclusion. And what it did for me is it gave me that feeling of control. And it kept me from that feeling of being overwhelmed. What happens oftentimes for students is that you get that little bit behind, and then you start to panic because it feels like a big mountain that's out there. Just like too much to be able to accomplish. So yeah, time management, the planner. And I try to get my students to do that at the beginning of every semester, either with their smartphones or with a planner. Write it all out. This is when I'm in class, this is when I go to work, and actually schedule the time in. This is when I'm going to study. See if that might help as well. I'll write down questions and talk with my instructor after class. This is another really big one. I have multiple assignments in my classes, so I don't have one big test. I have lots of little tests, written assignments. Give everything in the syllabus at the beginning. And I will ask people, do you have any questions? Nobody will have a question. And I'll ask again, does anybody have any questions? Like several days later. And closer to the assignment, does anybody have any questions? And there's a tremendous fear of raising your hand in class and asking a question. People are very uncomfortable with that. I talk with my 13-year-old son about that too. It starts, in like elementary school or middle school, somehow raising your hand is uncool.
My teacher told me I raised my hand too much. She was like, we need to give other students a chance to answer. You raise your hand too much. There's no way you know all the answers. Actually, I did, but
yeah.
My teacher was pretty.
Yeah, this is a fourth grade. Some real issues with your teachers. I have some real issues with your teachers.
That was in fourth grade.
Yeah.
Wow, that was bad.
Yeah. What I do now is if a student, and what students will do is they'll come to me on an aside. Can I ask you a question about my paper? Sure, go ahead. They ask me the question. Okay, now I'm going to throw that out to the whole class. And I make sure that the whole class hears the question. And it's not because I'm trying to embarrass anybody, but guess what? 15 other people in there had the same question. I know they have the same question.